I just finished playing Highguard, and here's what I think. I put about an hour into the game, and I'm typically not the guy to go to these live servicey, PvP type multiplayer games. So excuse me for a minute if I don't sound as well versed in my opinions, but here's just what I picked up. Right out the gate, I ran inside of the game's tutorial mode and spent about 10 to 15 minutes, however much that time investment was, just learning the game's universal controls. Nothing seemed very complicated, though I did find the game a little more comfortable to play on controller, despite the fact I did play some time using keyboard and mouse. There was nothing wrong with the keyboard and mouse controls that went into my decision making, mind you, it's merely a personal preference. Which, speaking of the tutorial real quick because I don't have a better place to put it, I did encounter a bizarre glitch that after I finished it, I wasn't able to hop into a match. For some reason, every time I would hit play, it would just keep throwing me back into the tutorial over and over again. I had to eventually close the game and reopen it, to which it then finally let me play with other people. As far as the actual performance goes, the game does look and sound good, despite the claim going around that the game is very generic aesthetically speaking. And yeah, I do agree with that sentiment myself. This fantasy with minor, seemingly sci-fi elements didn't really leave a lasting impression on me between the game's announcement or its final release. I will say, some of the playable characters do at least have nuggets that give me a glimmer of hope that the team can branch out a bit and flesh out the world that they put together. It's just really hard to get a grasp on what it is when there's so little in the game since it just launched. Slade and Una are my personal highlights among the starting roster, as both of their outfits have something about them that distinguishes them really well from the rest of the game's aesthetic. And I do want to specify that while I say this, none of these designs are outright bad and far from it. However, when I compare Highguard's art style to the casts of its contemporaries like Team Fortress 2, Apex Legends, or Overwatch, I find those games stand out a lot more. Sure, 2 out of the 3 of those are more cartoony, but I find a bit more personality in something like a space station on the moon that has minor set pieces of those characters living there, or industrial facilities within a certain period in history, as opposed to the fantasy setting being played straight. And I know I'm cutting from characters to maps, but on the topic of maps, the ones present at launch in Highguard aren't terrible. In truth, Smuggler's Den and Kingslayer are the only maps that I feel, purely from a visual standpoint, are lackluster. I think if the team is hoping for this game to catch on, I really hope they reevaluate some of the environments they envision for this world going forward, because the best ones to me are the ones where the weather takes a hold of the setting. The snowdress buildings in Frosthold and the mossy overtaking of Wellspring are the highlights that, if this can be elaborated on for a more defined setting, I think Highguard would catch a lot more attention. Because really, give me a haunted castle in a swampy marshland during the rain at night, where the middle of the map is a sprawling courtyard/cemetery. Give me a cavern covered in gems that shows signs of a dragon destroying the place as collateral for doing its business while sunlight peeks in through small gaps in the roof. Give me a dusty mountainside where footing can feel like standing on the edge of a cliff at dusk, while you see signs of animal wranglers of fantastical creatures coming through there on their travels. Heck, if the idea is to insist on being realistic, have a map that's the ruins of an enchanted courtroom that's been torn apart from a derailed train that's crashed into the building. I feel like anything like that could stand out as way more memorable to anyone who gives this game a chance. Just, please, Highguard devs, if you're listening. I feel like if the game just leaned a little bit into environmental storytelling in its maps, the mileage you could get out of that would be insane. I don't need big cinematic cutscenes explaining this kind of lore to me, or even extensive lore entries tucked away on a website somewhere. I just need some environments that give us an idea of what the world of Highguard is and why people should invest in it. Especially when it's launching in a period in time when people have so many options readily available to them that they can turn to. It may sound silly for me talking about a 3v3 PvP game that I've spent most of this video so far talking about the game's aesthetics, because truth be told, that's really the biggest problem that's holding it back. There's some minor things, of course. I don't like having to repeatedly use melee attacks in order to chip away at jewels in the stages to get a currency and then find a shop somewhere on the map. I find that kind of cumbersome, and the downtime between the actual combat to be way too long as a result of needing to account for players doing this or lack thereof. I also wish the mounts could be a little faster by default, since I tend to not want to trek from one end of the map to another every time I respawn when in the phase of trying to bring the Swordbreaker to the other team's base. I say that fully knowing I'm not a very big fan of open world games. I prefer my stuff a lot more compact, but I'm also aware the mounts are a bit of a unique thing for Highguard. Ultimately, I just feel like I don't care for the slower pace of the first phase in the games I played, where you bring this item called the Swordbreaker to the enemy base. I tended to prefer the second phase of these matches, where you're either attacking bases and raiding them, or defending your base from enemy raiders. I think if the developers can find a good middle ground for the stages to be a bit smaller, so getting around on a mount can feel less like a necessity and more so just another option of your toolkit, that would be golden. So yeah, I don't feel like the gameplay is bad at all. I really do think the only thing that will plague Highguard long term, if not rectified, comes from needing to divulge on the world and characters that this game takes place in, beyond what feels like can be currently described as someone just going, I don't know, man, sci-fi slash fantasy. Like, if someone's going to give me that description, I want them to be able to say that because they're so excited to talk about it, because they really don't know where to start since there's so many options that could lead it to being seen as one or the other if not described properly. That's way more fun. I don't really have much of a conclusion to end this video on, so in the words of Moist Critical, that's about it. See ya.